Hey, folks, this podcast is brought to you by King Arthur Capital Group. Fund your fight camp, showing fighters how to leverage credit and capital so they can treat their career like a business. Like I've said, I'm really happy and excited to be partnered with King Arthur Capital Group. Financial management and consultation is not a widely offered service in the combat sports space, and it's something that a lot of people could really benefit from. So I'm really excited to share that information with as many people in the combat sports world as possible. You can follow them on Instagram at King Arthur Capital Group and David King Arthur McElroy. Check out that interlude episode at mc.elroy, EMSEE.ELROY. Go check out King Arthur Capital Group. And folks, check out Fight Club Crate. Mystery fight gear, knockout prices, and undisputed value. They offer combat sports boxes delivered monthly. Use my promo code TAPTHAT15 at Fight Club Crate for 15% off your first purchase, and follow those folks on Instagram at Fight Club Crate. Very cool stuff, a very unique product offered in combat sports. You always wonder, what else people can think of. And, a monthly, subscription box of combat sports gear, mystery fight gear, other products. That's a very unique and cool thing. And finally, a winner of a gift idea for the combat connoisseur in your life. Again, use my promo code TAPTHAT15 to get 15% off your first purchase. Very excited to be working with those folks as well. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 206 of the Tap That MMA podcast. Looking forward to UFC Vegas 115 this weekend. And folks, there's more combat sports this week. It's a little slower because it's Easter and Easter, the Final Four and whatnot. So we got LFA 230. 174 just didn't happen. It was on Tapology with no fights listed up until when it was supposed to start. Then it just gone. So guess 174 went away without any explanation. That's a good sign for the future of that company. We got Chisora versus Wilder. We got Dubois versus Harper on Sunday. Zuffa Boxing 5. For my picks on all that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Now available on Apple Podcasts and Amazon Music. Um, Got a new website going for the podcast and for my UFL picks weekly. As of last week, I am now completely independent in all facets from Rotoballer. Thank you to those people for, a long time, me writing for them and whatnot, and doing the podcast, gave me a platform to hone these skills, put this kind of stuff together. But now my UFL picks for the time being are going to be on that blog. And you can find all my other content on there as well. Trying to get a bunch of different things going as I transition into this new era here for Tap That and other stuff that I write. So check out my UFL betting picks that'll be out tomorrow in blog form. I will share the link on my social media accounts. So just a quick recap of last week because we got a good UFC fight night last week, UFC Seattle. So, Alexa Danara came through. That was a good. Unfortunately, Bruno Brazil had to find out on Twitter that she had been cut from the UFC roster. That's never what you like to hear. Controversial draw between Ricky Simone and Adrian Yanez. Navajo Sterling takes care of business against Bruno Lopez. Casey O'Neill comes through for me with that knockout in the first round. Casey O'Neill, it's been fights have been few and far between. Had some hiccups there, but after that win, again, like Casey O'Neill is not old, and that is a person that can rise in the women's flyweight division. Tyrell Fortune wins in his long anticipated UFC debut against Marcin Tybura. Good win for him, and now a name you have to watch in this strange era of the heavyweight division. Lance Gibson Jr. comes through with the upset over Chase Hooper. Chase Hooper until further notice, that's a guy when he's a heavy favorite, it makes sense to fade. Lance Gibson Jr. put in a lot of good work in Bellator and had a really close fight in his short notice debut with Bobby Green. So, that was one that I was on. One I was not on, but Tafik Masayev ends up getting the decision over Ignacio Bahamondes. I was shocked by that, considering Tafik's last few fights not even in the UFC. Tafik looked fantastic last weekend. Definitely got away with some skirting of the rules. So you don't love that, but that was a big one for Tafik Masayev. I love Rising and Bellator veterans. Terrence T-Rex McKinney did it again. Round one, knockout, very fast over Kyle Nelson. What are you gonna do? Yusri Belgarui comes through for me, ends up getting the finish over Mansour Abdul Malik. Um, Proud to say that this one kind of went down like I said. Once Mansour Abdul Malik was faced with a someone who could kind of match him in the impressive physical measurements and whatnot, he wasn't able to land, those power shots and rely on, his explosiveness. And with his kickboxing, Belgarui just picked him apart until Mansour didn't really have anything left in him in that third round and put it away. Larry and Douglas put Julian Erosa to bed in round one. Michael Chiesa gets the round one submission over Nico Price in his retirement fight. And then we have the awkward, Chiesa gets the mic moment. Nico Price standing around waiting for it, doesn't get it. Look, I don't think you need to give Nico Price a big send off moment. It wasn't that kind of career necessarily. But if you told the guy you'd let him talk, don't let him stand there and then not let him talk. Jesus Christ. That's never a good look in someone's last. His last moment in the UFC was just weird and disappointing for him. You don't like to see that. Alexa Grasso with an absolute murder over Macy Barber, who before that fight, with the way Alexa Grasso was going, you're looking at is like, Macy is on her way to title contention at flyweight. Alexa Grasso knocked her out and then choked her unconscious with her tongue hanging out of her mouth. One of the most brutal finishes we've seen so far in 2026. Good for Alexa Grasso. And then Joe Pyfer ends up finishing Israel Adesanya from back mount in round two in what had been a back and forth fight. It certainly it's the furthest from peak Israel Adesanya that we've seen since he became a UFC champion. He's up there in age, he's on the decline, but even still, in a main event, it's not like he had to go 5 rounds, but he took damage, and against a guy as skilled and experienced as Izzy, and he ends up getting the win. So I don't know if that's exactly Joe Pyfer getting over the hump, but I mean that was obviously a big challenge for him to overcome. With the Jack Hermanson opportunity and the Kelvin Gastelum fight, not really either going his way or doing much to impress people or make them think that he's a future contender at middleweight. But that main event, whether you like his personality or not, I'm sure that converted some people into believers and some people into fans. So that's how UFC Seattle went down. Folks, we got 13 fights on the slate for UFC Vegas at 115. This is not a star-studded card, but there's a lot of good fights on here. Or at least, outcomes I'm really interested to see. Starting off with a men's featherweight, why did I say men's? A featherweight matchup between Dakota Hope and Kai Kamaka III. Kai Kamaka, former guest on this podcast. Kai Kamaka is the minus 150 favorite. Dakota Hope, the plus 130 underdog. Let's start with Dakota Hope. 11-1 as a professional. 29 years old. 5 of his career wins by knockout, 1 submission, 5 wins by decision. His only losses by decision, 1-0 in LFA. He's fought once in LFA against Jeremy Henry. A couple of fights in Fury, JCK, peak fighting. His last loss was in 2022 by unanimous decision to David Bosnick for the AKA featherweight title. He's been a champion in peak fighting. I there's just not a whole lot here as far as his professional resume goes. And, he's been in some good promotions, but he definitely has not fought incredibly experienced fighters. The fighter with the most robust record he's faced so far was Damian Nelson, 9-4, and that was in Fury Challenger Series in this past November. Kai Kamaka, I love Kai Kamaka. Um, the Fighting Hawaiian 17-7 and 1, 31 years old. Overall, the dude is 6-1 in Bellator, 1-2-1 in the UFC, 2-1 in PFL, 1-0 in LFA. The guy only has three losses dating back to May of 2021, and that was back when that was his one of his last fights in the UFC. It was a split decision loss to TJ Brown. And let me lay some facts on you here with Kai Kamaka. His last four losses, TJ Brown in the UFC by split decision. He's been a very active fighter, by the way. Bellator 279, Justin Gonzalez by split decision. August 2024, Brendan Lovenane, PFL 9, lost by split decision. And October of 2025 for the Tough Enough featherweight title against former tough competitor Diego Brandao, loss by split decision. Obviously, he's fought plenty of very good fighters in the meantime. Pedro Carvalho, Joshua Weems, Bubba Jenkins, Henry Corrales, Adlia Edwards. This guy's fought plenty of very recognizable fighters. And the only, his last loss by finish was 5.5 years ago to Jonathan Pierce. His only four losses over the last 5 years have all been by split decision and all to solid opponents. So I don't think you have to go crazy with this one. Like Dakota Hope, this could be a huge win for him. I would immediately have a lot of respect for him if he was able to beat someone like Kai Kamaka and make that leap from the competition he's faced up to this point. But with Kai Kamaka being minus 150 money line all day, Kai Kamaka hit it. And, most reasonably, I think if you're going outcome, you could go by decision. I don't think you have to, but if I was going with a method of victory here, I go Kai Kamaka minus 150. And really, if you're going a method of victory for Dakota Hope, I think you'd have to go Dakota Hope by decision. Kai Kamaka is a very hard guy to finish. That's why, no one's been able to do it in years, and everybody that's beaten him has done so on the word of one judge, making it or breaking the difference. Next up, we've got a women's flyweight matchup between Dion Barbosa and Melissa Gatto. Melissa Gatto is the plus 107 underdog. Dion Barbosa, the minus 127 favorite. This is a tough one. I think it is appropriately handicapped. Dion Barbosa, counting the Contender Series, won 3 of her last 5 fights, at the UFC level. Submission on the Contender Series, then beat Ernesta Karakate by decision. May of 2024 at UFC 301. Submitted Diana Belbita. Her only losses in the UFC are to Miranda Maverick. It was 29-28 on one judge's scorecard. And then most recently, August of last year, to Karine Silva by unanimous decision, 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Melissa Gatto, she's younger. She's a little bit, she has a longer reach. She's a little bit shorter. And it's just she has 2 losses in the UFC too. They're not bad. It's to Tracy Cortez by unanimous decision, May of 2022. The activity has not been there for Melissa Gatto, and that was a close fight with Tracy Cortez. It was a close fight with Ariana De Silva, who has mostly lost in the UFC, but still has some decent wins. Casey O'Neill, JJ Aldrich, those are, Luana Carolina. It's nothing to sneeze at. Just, it's been mostly losses. The most recent win is May of 2024, a finish over Tamiris Vidal. Vidal, has now lost 3 in a row in the UFC. Her only win is November 2022, a knockout over Ramona Pascual. So this just comes down to I think their resumes are kind of similar. I give the credit to Dion Barbosa, who I think has the more impressive of the 2 losses between them. The better recent performances, the better recent win. and the greater activity level. I don't think that, the 4 year age gap, it's not the period of years that'll make a significant difference to me. I see why this is closely handicapped, but for that activity reason and for the strength of the recent resume, I'm just going to go Dion Barbosa, minus 127 money line. Hit it. Next up, we've got a middleweight matchup between Azamat Bakoev and Tresean Gore.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
Azamat Bakoev, the minus 650 favorite. Tresean Gore, the plus 475 underdog. Well, let's talk about Tresean Gore, the underdog, first. So, ended up, this guy was supposed to be in the finale of The Ultimate Fighter, ended up getting hurt. Gilbert Urbina stepped in to fight Brian Battle in the finale. They eventually do Tresean Gore versus Brian Battle, loses by unanimous decision. But he was not a very experienced professional before this, obviously. Before coming to the UFC, he was undefeated at 6-0. Now he is 6 and wait, he must have been, yeah, he was what, 4-0. Now he's 6-4. Lost to Battle by decision. Got knocked out by Cody Brundage. He did get 2 straight guillotine wins over Josh Fremd and Antonio Tricoli. Those are now like 3.5 and like 1.5 years ago. And his last 2 fights have been a brutal knockout loss to Marco Tulio, who outstruck him 127-17 with 2 knockdowns en route to the second round knockout.
Oh God, take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
And then he lost the unanimous decision last August to Rodolfo Vieira, who outstruck him 89-41, beat him 30-27 on 2 of 3 judges' scorecards. Azamat Bakoev is smaller. They're the same height. He will have a shorter reach by a few inches. Tresean Gore is actually the older of the two. Azamat Bakoev is 20-4 as a professional overall. What was his deal? He was the LFA champion. 4-0 in LFA, 3-2 in ACA, 3-1 in ACB. Yeah, he was the LFA champion at light heavyweight back in June in 2024. At middleweight, interim middleweight. This is a middleweight fight. The hell am I talking about? It's been a different. Nope. Yeah, middleweight. All right. Yeah, so I got to be thinking of another light heavyweight, but yeah, Bakoev was the LFA middleweight champion as recently as June of 2024. Comes into the UFC, knocks out Zach Reese in the first round, then knocks out Ryan Loder in the first round. And, Loder at that point was coming off his finish of Robert Valentine in the Ultimate Fighter finale. And that put a hard stop to any momentum that he had. Now he is coming off the third round knockout loss to Yusri Beljarui, and as we saw, it is not that insulting to get knocked out in the third round by Beljarui. If that means he's like Mansour Abdul Malik, I think that's a problem for Tresean Gore. So Bakoev in total for his career, 8 wins by knockout, 8 by submission, 4 by decision. Over his last 5 wins, 3 have been by knockout, 2 have been by decision. It's, he had 3 submissions to start his professional career, is why those like finish numbers are a little bit skewed to, say that they're as likely as each other to happen. They're not. Knockout and decision are the most 2 likely outcomes. I just don't have like confidence against for Tresean Gore against somebody like, I don't want to say with a pulse, somebody that is competitive at middleweight, because middleweight for years has had this bottom rung where they've all competed against each other and they'd collect some wins. It was Cedric Dumas, it was Josh Fremd, it was Andre Petrosky, Cody Brundage, guys like that, where you didn't think that like the whole group of them kind of belonged to the UFC at different points. And so that was who Tresean Gore was able to get wins over, and not even all of them. Rodolfo Vieira is kind of a step up. He wasn't able to win that. He, at least made it the distance, but I think that Bakoev either finishes Trayshawn Gore or ends up winning the decision. I just don't see Trayshawn Gore being able to do, enough damage on the feet, and I don't think that he catches Bakoev, with a guillotine or anything like that. Bakoev has been submitted once in 24 professional fights. We're just talking different tiers here of the UFC middleweight division. If I'm looking at Bakoev, who is again like a pretty heavy favorite at minus 650, I would either go um by knockout is plus 120. By decision is only plus 225. That's, I'd prefer knockout there. I think that he wants to get back to, in the win column after his last fight against Beljarui. Um, Trayshawn Gore might be a little bit more aggressive at this one too. This is a make or break one where he is risking, falling to 6-5. If you get a good number on method of victory, double chance for Bakoev to win by decision or by knockout, totally do that. But I am all over Asmat Bakoev here. Hit that. Next up, we've got a women's bantamweight matchup between Alice Pereira and Haley Cowan. Pereira is the minus 135 favorite. Haley Cowan, the plus 115 underdog. Let's talk about Haley Cowan first. This is a tough one to figure out. Like, it's Haley Cowan is mysterious. 7-4 as a pro, 34 years old. Um, like there's been some big gaps, a lot of cancellations. She fought, in LFA, had a pretty good record there, and fought once in Invicta, got the win there, won on the Contender Series by split decision. That was August of 2022. Then she has two straight fights canceled in 2023. Then ends up losing to Jamie Lynn Horth by unanimous decision April of 2023. Then another two fights canceled. The next time she fights was 2 years later against Nora Cornole. That was last April, and she ended up getting submitted in round two. Alice Pereira, 5-1, not the sister of Alex Pereira. That's a common joke this week and a common mistake. Pereira is now 20 years old. She was born December of 2005. 5'8" with a 71-inch reach, 3 wins by knockout, 1 by submission, 1 by decision. She is coming off the first loss of her professional career by split decision to Monse Rendon. Monse is, coming off the loss to Bia Mesquita, but it hasn't been a horrible run for Monse Rendon in the UFC. It was I think for someone who is like, what, 2005, she wasn't yet 20. She was 19 when she lost by split decision to Monse Rendon. Her professional pedigree coming into the UFC is certainly suspect. She was like a young teenager leading all the way up to winning the Cage Masters FC Bantamweight Championship December of 2024 over 12-8-1 Samara Santos. Several of her fights are, flagged by Tapology. I'm going to try to ignore that stuff for this one. Haley Cowan, and it's tough, but like this has been a lot of time passed for Haley Cowan. It's now been what, like approaching 4 years since she's had a win. She's only fought twice in the last 4 years. Her fight to get into the UFC was a split decision win on the Contender Series. And now those Invicta and LFA fights are, far in the distance. Even, going back to some of those wins, they were, by split decision over like 2-1 Brittany Cloudy. She lost her pro debut to Victoria Leonardo. This is one that usually, and I will hate myself if I end up having the wrong, instinct on this one. Normally, I would say Haley Cowan as an underdog, considering, still what what got her to the UFC, and considering how young Pereira is, considering what Pereira did before coming into the UFC, um, it was, that would normally steer me towards the slight underdog and Haley Cowan. But I think it was a good experience for Elise Pereira in her UFC debut. Almost got the win over, a decently respectable opponent. And 19, 20 years old, you got to think that Haley Cowan's days of, improving at a substantial rate could be over. And, who knows what has been going on in her life and with fight preparation when you've only fought twice in close to the last 4 years. You haven't won since August of 2022. So I expect to see like a sharper Elise Pereira at, now 20 years old as opposed to 19. Again, I don't think you have to go crazy trying to predict what happens in this one. I would say Elise Pereira money line minus 135. Hit it. And what you could do though is like you could do Elise Pereira by like split decision. That is plus 600. It's the same as Haley Cowan to win by split decision. So that's a decent value there. And then as far as like the spread, not seeing a spread. Yeah, I think Haley Cowan can cover the spread. I think that this will end up being a close fight. I just like having a hard time trusting Haley Cowan for the way the last few years have gone. That's unfortunate for her, but 20 is still really young to be in the UFC. But I think Elise Pereira will have greatly benefited from the experience of her UFC debut. Next up, we've got a lightweight matchup between Lando Venata and Darius Flowers.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
Lando Venata is the minus 210 favorite. Darius Flowers, the plus 180 underdog. All right, let's talk about Lando first, I guess. Born in 1992, 12-7-2 as a professional. Has actually fought in the UFC a good amount of times for only having 21 career fights. He's been in the UFC dating back to July of 2016. His debut was a loss to Tony Ferguson. He's beaten John McDessie. He's beating Yancy Medeiros, Mike Grundy, and that except for one fight, that is all of his wins in the UFC. But he's had to fight. He's had draws with Bobby Green and with Matt Frivola. The losses are to Daniel Zellhuber. That last one was by decision a few years ago. So, lack of activity there. Charles Jourdain, he submitted him. He ended up losing the rematch to Bobby Green. Lost to Drakkar Close, Matt Frivola. The Frivola was a draw. David Teemer. That's a crazy resume. This is going to be his first fight in the UFC in 3 years at this point. No fights in between. He's had several fights canceled. He was supposed to fight most recently April of 2024 against James on top, and that obviously didn't end up happening. Darius Flowers, the underdog, 12-8-1 as a pro, 31 years old. Like it's again an interesting career here for a dude who was also, boxed professionally. He fought Devin Smith like in 2017. That's already like, recognizable. Does not have a good pro boxing record. Has been in King of the Cage and LFA and Shamrock FC. That's now, years and years ago. He lost to Bobby Volker there. So fast forwarding to LFA back in 2022. Got a couple of wins there. One on the Contender Series, causing a shoulder injury from a slam against Amiran Gogoladze. He's lost all three fights in the UFC from July 2023 to July 2024. Got finished by Jake Matthews, lost by decision to Michael Johnson, and got submitted by Evan Elder. The Evan Elder one is the one that is kind of the nail in the coffin there. Evan Elder did not have I guess he's 3-2 in the UFC. Not against strong competition, but that's wild. I might be revising this. I swear. Arias Flowers 31, Lando 34, hasn't fought in 3 years. Last win in mixed martial arts was by split decision over Mike Grundy, May of 2021. You know what? I'm flipping around on this. Again, that is a big layoff for Lando, and was supposed to have fights in between. Darius Flowers, at least his UFC record isn't as bad as it looks with those three in a row. And, at least one of the contender series, like close to 4 years ago, did well in LFA. I don't know. This is a tough one. Six career losses by submission. Lando, 5 wins by submission, but hasn't won by submission since he did that over Marcus Mariano, who was 6-4 at the time back in February 2019. Then you got to go back to like 2014 for a submission by Lando. You know what? I'm changing this. Let's go Darius Flowers, plus 180 money line. With the weirdness of Lando's layoff, he's older. Darius Flowers, I at least just won more recently, at least just fought more recently against, decent competition. And Evan Elder isn't as bad of a loss as, some people think from the surface. So let's go Lando Veneta, or let's get Darius Flowers, money line plus 180. I don't feel great about it, but I think it's the right play to make. And I got to change some stuff around that I did with Lando here. Hit that. Oh, God, that is a weird one. Next. In fact, that deserves this.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
All right, next up. We had a flyweight match between Alessandro Costa and Stuart Nickel. Alessandro Costa is the minus 400 favorite, Nickel the plus 300 underdog. Let's talk about Stuart Nickel first. Born in 1996, 8-2 as a pro. Both losses came in the UFC over the last couple of years. Got submitted by Jesus Aguilar and lost by decision to Lucas Rocha last October. Got pretty pieced up by Lucas Rocha. That was 30-27 on all three judges' scorecards. And then before the UFC, obviously he was 8-0. He's not, particularly old or anything. But, most of his career, it was spent with XFC, but that goes back a number of years where he was the champion at flyweight there. And then, spent the rest of his pro career in beatdown promotions before making his way to the UFC. Alessandro Costa, also born in 1996. He'll have a 2-inch reach advantage, even though he's an inch shorter. This guy's had wins in the UFC. And not that it always goes this way, but he won on the Contender Series July 2022 by split decision. Then he loses by knockout to Amir Albazi. He knocks out Jimmy Flick. Then he loses by decision to Steve Erceg. Then he knocks out Kevin Boras, May of 2024. Then he gets knocked out by Alden Correa, September of 2025. Correa then went on to, beat Luis Garuli in unanimous decision. Correa could be, another riser at flyweight. Alessandro Costa has only lost to good flyweights. If it seems like Correa is going to hold up, and I think it does. But he's never lost two in a row in the UFC. I'm not saying patterns have to hold, but some people respond to losses better than others. Some people respond to wins better than others. So here, like Stuart Nichols never been knocked out. Costa's at least won one fight in the UFC by decision. Even that, he got a knockdown in it. I don't think the knockout is like ruled out just because Nichols never been knocked out. Costa at minus 400, it's tough to find something that you like for him. By knockout is plus 180. By decision is plus 200. That's one where I'd look at, potentially, taking a method of victory double chance, or Costa to cover -3.5 is -250. So, you know, maybe that's a better parlay piece than -400 would be. Um, yeah, it's hard to find a good one here, but I think a method of victory double chance to cover the spread. I think those are good pieces. It's not something I'm getting too excited about, but I do feel confident in Alessandro Costa over Stuart Nickel. And this could be the final piece, yeah, or the final nail in the coffin for Nickel, too, because his run in the UFC has not gone well. And it's not like there's a ton in his professional career before the UFC to support keeping him around for too much longer. Next up, in fact, I'll say this, Stuart Nickel.
Oh, take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
Next up, we have a heavyweight matchup between Guilherme Pat and Thomas Peterson. Is Thomas Peterson still a ranked UFC heavyweight? Let's check on that real quick. Always good at checking on the UFC heavyweight rankings. So, Tyrell Fortune is now top 10. Taliesin's still in there. Mick Parkin, Walter Walker, Shamil, they're still in there. Ante DeLiha is actually at number 9. The hell did wait? I gotta see that. Who was Delia's last fight? All right, lost to Sergey Spivak. So that's where the UFC heavyweight rankings are at. Thomas Peterson was up there at some point. He was in the top 15. Anyway, Thomas Peterson is the -115 favorite at this point. Pat the -105, very slight underdog. I feel like that reversed itself here throughout the week. Let's start with Thomas Peterson. Um, Thomas Peterson, 6'1", 74-inch reach, born in 1995. He has also never lost 2 in a row in the UFC. He's a 10-4 professional. Beat Chandler Cole in the Contender Series. Then lost to Jamal Pogues by unanimous decision. Then beat Muhammad Usman by unanimous decision. Then got knocked out by Shamil Ghazayev. Beat Dontel Mays by decision, and then is coming off a knockout loss to Vitor Petrino. Got battered in that one last October. Here's the thing, like, he handled a guy like Dontel Mays, who has very similar physical measurements to Guilherme Pat, but they are a different kind of fighter and a different kind of athlete. Dontel Mays, that was his last fight, his most recent one in the UFC, and he looked less and less there, as he lost to Gazaya, Volter, and then Thomas Peterson. Thomas Peterson is a solid fighter, but I think a lot of the time his activity just leaves you wanting more, especially take like the Muhammad Usman fight. Um, you know, I, I just think he can be underwhelming. And against someone with pop, against someone with athleticism, you know, quickness and a size advantage. I think Thomas. I think Guilherme Pat is going to have really benefited from his UFC debut against Alan Fry, who, is not really, a bad opponent if you really look at it in comparison. And I think that like Guilherme Pat, for his age, he's 31, but his pro career, he's 6-0 as a pro. He had one fight in LFA before getting signed to the UFC. This is still very much new. This is a big step up after a big step up after a big step up for Guilherme Pat. But the dude has earned his nickname Kong. 4 of his knockouts, or 4 of his wins are by knockout. The other 2 are by decision. He is 6'5" with an 81-inch reach. That's going to be an issue. And if you watch him at the end of the Alan Fry fight, it was one that he wasn't able to put away. He made it through the course of 3 rounds. He, had some troubles at times, but I think, is going to benefit from, this being his 7th pro fight, being able to, maybe prevent Thomas Peterson from keeping him up against the cage. I think that Thomas Peterson is going to get hit, within the first 2 rounds by some really hard shots from Guilherme Pat. And, that is where the unraveling of Thomas Peterson can begin. I think if Thomas Peterson wins this fight, I think that it ends up being kind of a boring fight where Thomas Peterson has to kind of rely on keeping Guillermo Pat up against the cage and, kind of using some, kind of softer grappling methods to, outscore him over the course of 3 rounds. The last finish for Thomas Peterson of it was back on the Contender Series, August of 2023. It was already that long ago, man. Where's Chandler Cole at? Let's see what Chandler Cole's up to. His last, he did a kickboxing match January of 2025. I'd like to see that guy in some other shows. I like a guy like Chandler Cole. But yeah, I'm actually going with the very slight underdog here, Guillermo Pat. You never know with odds like this. You never know if people are going to overreact to, or if they're just going to be really down on Thomas Peterson, if they're going to react too much to the size of Guillermo Pat. I think the size is going to be important because I think that Guillermo Pat has 3 rounds in him, and he was still throwing hard shots. I think he's going to have a speed advantage too, and that's a dangerous thing when you have such a reach advantage and you have power. So Thomas Peterson's not going to be safe no matter what round it is, and this isn't something where I think Guillermo Pat is going to melt into heavyweight butter once it goes past 10 minutes. So again. I Thomas Peterson's never lost 2 in a row in the UFC. Patterns like that don't always hold. I don't know exactly how it happens. It could be a knockout, could be a decision. And again, like you look at Guillermo Pat's record, I'm going against a lot of my usual instincts. Maybe that's what I got to do. Change is a good thing. Fought in Spartacus MMA, but has one fight in LFA against a 4-4 opponent, Mauricio Queiroz. But Alan Fry, he wasn't incredibly experienced as a pro either. 6-1. He was big, 6 feet tall with an 80.5-inch reach. But he had fought some. He hadn't, but it was why I was on Fry in that fight because I was like, what is the difference between these two? In their professional resumes, you saw the difference between the two. Alan Fry took some really hard shots. I don't think anybody's saying that Alan Fry isn't tough, but Guillermo Pat has something right now that you'd like to see at heavyweight, and you'd like to see how far he can go. Is he's big, he's got power. I think he's athletic, he's got agility, and I think that he can bring it throughout the course of 3 rounds. I think Thomas Peterson has fewer ways to win this fight. He's got a really reliable thing that he can try to do here. He's going to want to keep Pat against the cage. I think Pat is going to improve, after that win back in December. And he's going to have some new defensive tools in his arsenal. And, maybe Thomas Peterson's going to have to go back to the drawing board early in this fight. And, that's a dangerous place for Thomas Peterson to be. So give me Guillermo Pat as the very slight underdog, -105 on the money line. Hit it. Oh, man. All right. Next up, we have a featherweight matchup between Jose Delano and Robert Ruchala. Ruchala is the +245 underdog. Jose Delano, the -290 favorite. All right, let's talk about Delano first. So where's this one at now? Oh, Edmund Shabazi and Jung Young Park was supposed to be on this card. That would have been cool. All right, Delano, 16-3 as a professional, 29 years old, 5'8" with a 70-inch reach, 4 wins by knockout, 5 by submission, 7 by decision, 1 loss each of those 3 categories, 6-1 in LFA. His only loss in LFA was by knockout at the hands of Gabriel Santos at LFA 151, January of 2023. He has been LFA champion and Shooto Brazil champion. That goes back a number of years. That was at featherweight. And, he's won 4 in a row now. 3 of those being in LFA by decision, rear naked choke, and knockout. And then he beat Manuel Exposito by unanimous decision on the Contender Series, August of 2025. In that fight, he outstruck Exposito 146-38. He did get taken down twice, didn't matter. 30-27 on all three judges' scorecards. Robert Ruchala, born in 1998, actually younger than Jose Delano. Wouldn't have necessarily guessed that. He is 11-2 as a professional. And where Robert Ruchala comes from, and he will have when I say that Delano had a 70-inch reach. So Ruchala's a little bit bigger. Will have a 2-inch reach advantage. I think they're both the same height at 5'8". 3 wins by knockout, 3 by submission, 5 by decision, 1 loss by decision, 1 loss by knockout. He is 8-1 in KSW. So here are the 2 professional losses, because he has a pretty robust amateur career too. But 9 fights in KSW. And, wins over 7-0, 7-0, 13-8 by split decision. That was over Damian Stasiak. Then he wins the KSW interim featherweight title over Lom Ali Eskayev with a round 5 finish. Ultimately loses in the unification bout against Salahdin Parnasse. Wins the interim belt again at KSW 94 over Patrick Kajmarzik. And then I guess, does he defend it? Defended the interim belt over Kasper Formella, again by round 3 finish. Now, and hasn't had a submission since January 2021. Like a lot of these guys, he had 3 submissions in a row, all 3 of his career submissions early in his pro career. Mostly it's been decisions and knockouts lately. He makes his UFC debut September of 2025 against William Gomi, gets outstruck 49-34, 2 takedowns each. He ends up losing 29-28 on the judges' scorecards. So I think that this one is actually, I don't know exactly what's fueling this line being so lopsided. It is very impressive to be a former LFA champion. It's very impressive to, win on the Contender Series like he did. This isn't a knock against Jose Delano, but being minus 290 seems just a little bit extreme here for a guy that was an interim KSW champion on multiple occasions. He lost to William Gomi by decision. A lot of people lose to William Gomi by decision. He's good at doing that to people. And the only other loss was to Saladin Parnasse, who is, one of the best fighters in the world in a major promotion outside of the UFC. And just to point out, William Gomi, who is 15-3 as a pro, he's also beaten Anderson Brito. And I thought it would be more impressive going through here. But, he has a unanimous decision loss to Saladin Parnasse, too. William Gomi is good at close fights that are mainly dictated in striking. I think that Ruchala will have more of an opportunity to, land harder shots here. I just think this fight is a lot closer than the line indicates. And I don't think people respect KSW. People are not, don't really respect any of the major promotions outside of the UFC. But hey, good run for Bellator the other day. It was maybe, between Tyrell Fortune, Lance Gibson, and I know I'm forgetting, and Tafik Messiah. That was probably the best day for former Bellator fighters on a UFC card that we've ever seen. Maybe the tide is turning. And we saw from what is it? Now I'm blanking here. And you'll search it further. Jesus Christ.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see it by the fight, what you saw in the ring.
So we saw when Nathaniel Wood fought Lucene Kieta and won by split decision. KSW, those guys can compete. I think people coming over from major promotions are starting to do a little better. And by the way, for anybody throwing disrespect to any of the major promotions outside of the UFC, I think there's a trend of, UFC fighters leaving the UFC and struggling in outside promotions too. maybe it's not that KSW and Bellator and PFL and One and Ryzen and Octagon suck. Maybe it's that it's hard to transition between major MMA promotions. Especially coming off of losses, which they probably are if they're transitioning from a different promotion. We just saw Brian Battle get easily submitted by Johnny Evelyn in his PFL debut. So, and Brian Battle was a guy with a very good record in the UFC. So maybe it's just the transition is difficult. And, now Richala has one under his belt, 3 rounds in the UFC. So for him being plus 245, I'm going to go there. Money line on the underdog. Hit it. Yeah, and Jose Delana, he could win 9 straight, at featherweight. I think that that's possible. This guy could rise for sure, but I think that these odds are just a little lopsided, minus 290. What Delano has done in the LFA and on the Contender Series has been quite impressive. Next up, we've got Tommy McMillan and Manolo Zucchini at featherweight. Tommy McMillan is the minus 1,400 favorite. Zucchini the plus 800 underdog.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
I meant this.
Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
All right. Well, let's start with the massive favorite, Tommy Gun McMillan. Guy associated with Sugar Sean O'Malley. Kid's got some personality. He's 28 years old, 9-0 as a professional. 3 wins by knockout, 5 by submission, 1 by decision. 7-0 in Fusion Fight League. Where is Fusion Fight League? You might ask. Where are they located? Montana, that region of the country where people are of a different breed. Montana, you do anything impressively in Montana, you got to pay attention. That's a different kind of state. So, it started off in his pro career like, not fighting high caliber opponents, but that changed as he approached the Contender Series. Was the Fusion Fight League champion. Opponents were 8-5, 6-4, 7-4, 21-19. That was at RUF 62. Then he beat David McGoyan on the Contender Series. McGoyan was very young, and he was undefeated at 8-0. And God, he must have been what? When that fight happened, he must have been like 20. So that's not a huge number, but McGoyan as a guy who had competed and won in LFA and Cage Fury and Tough Enough, and he's actually he's won once by decision at UNF 30 since that Contender Series fight. And he's going to be fighting Albert Morales on the MVP MMA 1 Rousey versus Carano card on May 16th. So, Tommy McMillan submitted himself, legitimized himself, as his professional career got to 6, 7, 8, 9 wins. Manolo Zucchini, Angelo Veneziano is his nickname. Just sounds like a name. 11-4 as a pro, 29 years old. 9 of his career wins are by knockout, 1 by submission, 1 by decision. He's lost once by submission, once by decision, twice by knockout. Coming off a knockout loss to Morgan Charriere, he's lost 2 of his last 4 fights, and that takes you all the way back. So he loses to Morgan Charriere September of 2023. So he already hasn't fought in what's approaching 3 years. Before that, he had 2 wins in a row in Venator FC in 2022 by knockout over opponents with a combined 19, 15, and 1 record. Lost by decision March of 2022 to 5-0 Karamatullo Sufiev in Venator FC. And his most recent fight before that was August of 2019, beating opponents to 2-1, 3-1 at Street Fight Party and Mazzara Combat in the Cage. He fought in 1, Venator is recognizable. I see that, and I know that it is an MMA promotion that I have seen people come from before. I inherently don't trust Italian fighters too much or the Italian regional scene. God, I wish I had some sort of Godfather drop for that. The one time he fought in Cage Warriors, he got knocked out in the second round by 4-0 Danny Matheson. Minus 1400 is ridiculous. I don't know if anybody in MMA outside of a very select few people should be minus 1400. Do I think Tommy McMillan ends up winning this fight? And do I think, like, most likely that it ends up happening by, inside the distance? I think that makes the most sense for a guy like Zucchini, who has fought so few times over the last handful of years, such big gaps, such, roller coaster levels of competition quality. And, Tommy McMillan's first non-finish was against David McGoyan, 20 years old, but that guy is, still somebody to watch at 21. He very well might make his way back to the UFC. Let's see what he does on May 16th on that Rousey Carano card. I will say, like, give me Tommy McMillan, just like inside the distance. That's not going to get you anything awesome. It's minus 550. I guess we can try to be a little bit more specific here. McMillan, round one, round one, round one, round one, round one. So many round one finishes until you go back to like his amateur career. So I'd say Tommy McMillan in round two. In round one, it's minus 105. In round two, it's plus 205. Yeah, this is the UFC now. He's coming off a fight that went the distance. You get a much better value for round two. I think that those are kind of a coin flip. Can Zucchini survive 5 minutes? Give me Tommy McMillan in round two plus 205. Hit it. Yeah, tough to pick when you've got guys with limited professional experience, limited recent professional experience, and one of them's a minus 1400 favorite coming off a Contender Series fight. And before that, I had my questions about how he would adjust to the UFC competition, but still, McGoyan being so young, that's a different kind of test. This is a different kind of test, but for the most part, fade the Italian fighters. That hasn't steered me wrong too much in my lifetime. Wasn't really a big factor until the last few years ago. Wasn't a big factor when I was 8 or anything. Anyway,
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
next up, now it's getting juicy. All right. We got Rafael Estevam against Ethan Ewing. Ethan Ewing is the minus 150 favorite. This is even further on the move. Estevam, the plus 130 underdog. Lot of factors here. All right. So let's start with 9-2. Ethan Ewing, 28 years old. 6 wins by knockout, 1 by submission, 2 by decision, 1-1 in LFA. He is the former Uriah Faber A1 Combat interim bantamweight champion. This fight is at bantamweight. He has, mostly fought at bantamweight the overwhelming amount of the time. I think pretty much his entire pro career outside of his UFC debut. Now, he made a 48-hour short notice appearance against Malcolm Wellmaker at UFC 322 back in November. That was at featherweight. He was the plus 330 underdog, ends up getting a dog of a win. People fell in love with Ethan Ewing after that performance. He, displayed great footwork, great head movement, great toughness. He survived a lot of hard shots. He landed a lot of them on his own. Ethan Ewing is a dog, all right? Now, Rafael Estevam, 14-0 as a professional, 29 years old. This is a guy who's 1-0 in LFA, 1-0 in the Contender Series. Obviously, he's never lost, but, since the Contender Series in 2022, He had a couple fights canceled, but then he beat Charles Johnson by unanimous decision, where he missed weight. Jesus Aguilar by unanimous decision, and Felipe Bunez by unanimous decision. He missed weight in that one too, back in August. And, like Estevan withdrew from the Alan Nascimento fight that was supposed to happen in November. This is a guy that was playing the con game for a while at flyweight, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm a flyweight fighter. And it's like, well, I'm actually like 133 pounds. Can we do it there? So he played the con game a couple of times. And really, like, as far as the eye test for Estevan, he got a knockout on the Contender Series, but statistically, there's a lot of people that thought like Felipe Bunez, should have won that fight. But, Estevan got it 29-28 on all three scorecards. He had nearly 11 minutes of control time, 128 total strikes. Only 33 were considered significant. In his last three fights, he's had a combined 19 takedowns, 3 against Charles Johnson. He controlled for almost 10 minutes of the fight. He just doesn't do a lot when he's down there. And he had 11 takedowns against Jesus Aguilar. Jesus Aguilar significantly struck him. Again, this is one where Estevan landed 60 total strikes. Only 11 were significant. While Aguilar landed 41 total and 35 were significant. Those stats are certainly, there's some variation in the credibility there, but he had almost 10 minutes of control time. Estevan is very good at taking people down. If they get up, going for a takedown again. If he gets hurt, going for the takedown. He is a good grappler. He's going to be at more of a natural weight class for him, but he's not going to have the con man's advantage this time. They are planning for this fight to be at bantamweight. So, beating Malcolm Willmaker on short notice, that was a big challenge, and especially the city where it was done. 48 hours, up a weight class, having to survive some hard shots. Ethan Ewing is a dog. I love Ethan Ewing. I'm going to be rooting for Ethan Ewing huge in this fight. But Estevan is undefeated for a reason. This many fights into the UFC and, fights with LFA and whatnot and the Contender Series. He is a good grappler. It's not a particularly exciting style, but he is really good at getting people down. And if they get up, getting them back down and, being relentless in that regard. His grappling offense is his best defense. So I think that this is a little bit of an overreaction to Ethan Ewing's debut. There's weird, psychological factors and circumstances that go into a short notice debut and an upset win like that. I don't think Willmaker ever should have been that much of a favorite against Ethan Ewing to begin with. Estevan plus 130 is not a bad money line value. I think Ewing will be able to get up. I think he'll be able to, land hard shots and, storm Estevan on the feet, make him very uncomfortable. But, if Estevan lands 3, 5, 6, 8 takedowns and gets 8, 9, 10 minutes of control time, wins 2 of the 3 rounds, even by slight margins that piss people off in the aftermath of the fight, I can see that happening. Plus 130 is not bad there. Now, I also think, I think that this fight does go over 2.5. I think this fight goes the distance. That's to go over 2.5 is minus 185. To go the distance is minus 160. That's not bad. Estevan by decision plus 200. That's only a little bit better than Ewing by decision plus 175. Yeah, specific method of victory, I would go Ewing by decision plus 175. That's a better value than Estevan by decision. For Rafael Estevan to cover the spread of 3.5, it's minus 180. I don't hate that either. I'm not ready to take the plunge on Estevan as the underdog necessarily, because I think he has, one thing in his arsenal to go to. And I think that it's going to be really hard to consistently deploy that against Ethan Ewing at bantamweight. When Estevan, was able to do that to flyweights, to to Charles Johnson, to Tiny Jesus Aguilar, when he, 2 of those 3 fights when he missed weight, and people still didn't necessarily think he was the rightful winner of those fights. So I'm not ready to get there yet. Ewing by split decision plus 850, that's something to look at, I think. Or, you know, yeah, that's what I'd say. So yeah, individual method of victory, Ewing by decision. But Estevam money line, Estevam to cover the spread, the fight to go over 2.5, the fight to go the distance, Ewing to win by split decision plus 850. I think all of those are in play. Interestingly enough, Estevam is minus 2,000 to have the more takedowns. Makes sense. Ethan Ewing to have over 44.5 significant strikes is plus 100. I like that. And then Estevam under 30.5 strikes, minus 130. I like that. Estevam total takedowns under 3.5. I actually think it'll be over 3.5, but that's actually a credit to Ethan Ewing. I think Estevam will get maybe 4 or 5 takedowns, but I don't think he'll have as much control time in this fight. So I think, and that's plus 115. So that's a fight where the props almost interest me more than any of the other. I think you're kind of get some better numbers there. That's tough. The public has reacted, dramatically and deservingly so for Ethan Ewing. I really hope he wins, but Estevam is 14-0 and has the record he does in LFA and the UFC for a reason. Next up, we've got a light heavyweight matchup between Abdul Rahman Yakayev and Brinson Ribeiro. Yakayev is the minus 1,400 favorite. Ribeiro, the plus 800 underdog. Brinson Ribeiro, has won, kind of the contender series, 3 fights in the UFC. He's lost 4. Got knocked out by Zhang Minyang. Lost a majority decision to Magomed Gadzhiyazilov. Got knocked out by Azamat Murzakanov. Got knocked out by Umar Sy. Ribeiro is tall. He's got the 81-inch reach. He's not old. His last win was by submission over Dayar Nurgazai, who is coming off the win over Rafael Tobias. The jury's out on Dayar Nurgazai. He looked a lot better in that fight against Rafael Tobias, but that's not saying much because I don't know why people were liking Tobias over Dayar in the first place. And he also beat Cal Machado by split decision. Even though he got outstruck 76-49. So not an awesome go for Brinson Ribeiro in the UFC. But in beating Cal Machado and in beating Dayar Nurgazai, it does say one thing about him. If you're a overhyped, dare I say, fraudulent prospect,
Oh God, take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
you're in danger. Got to bring your A game, all right? Now, Yakayev, 6'2", 78-inch reach, born in 2001, 8-0 as a professional, 1-0 in the UFC, 1-0 in the Contenders Series. He comes to us from Aries FC. By the way, this guy's Turkish. Shout out to Ilyas Mamadaliev, wherever you are. The Hunter, 25 years old, 3 wins by knockout, 4 by submission, 1 by decision. He was the Aries FC light heavyweight champion and defended it once. He was also the Confide champion. I don't know where Confide is. I am assuming. I don't want to assume. I might start a war. It was in Turkey. All right, that's what I was going to guess. Only 1 fight in his career went the distance, and it was his first title fight at Confide 2 against 7-0 Nikolai Kovalenko. So I respect Aries FC. So being a champion there and being able to defend it is meaningful. That was just back in 2024. He knocked out Alik Lorenz on the Contender Series, August of 2025. Lorenz, I guess it's just Alec Lorenz probably, based on how ginger this dude is. That guy has a winning record in LFA, not against the best opponents, but he's fought in decent promotions. His only loss before fighting Abdul Yakayev was to Darian Abbey at light heavyweight, and Darian Abbey, has also fought at heavyweight, so at least that's a recognizable name. But he finished Alec Lorenz in round one of the Contender Series and submitted Rafael Cerqueira in round one in his UFC debut. And Cerqueira hasn't won in the UFC. He never even won the Contender Series. He's 0-4 under the UFC banner. But it's a win in the UFC that he got done in round one. Of his inside the distance wins, only one has come outside of round one. And, importantly, Brinson Ribeiro knocked out in round one, knocked out in round one. Against Zhang Minyang, knocked out in round one back in AMC. David Barkudierin knocked him out in round one. Marcio Breno, 19-7 at Big Shot MMA 2, January 2022, knocked out Brinson Ribeiro in round one. Been finished in round one a lot is my point. And Yakiev, even though he actually has more submissions than, I guess inside the distance still makes sense. He's mixed in submissions and knockouts, fairly well. It's just Brinson Ribeiro has largely been, knocked out of late. His last submission loss was July 2016. And he had his two submission losses were both two in a row back in 2016. So, we're talking a minus 1,400 favorite here. Yakiev by knockout is minus 150. Not horrible, considering how much of a favorite he is. And the fact that Yakiev in round one is minus 300. By knockout is minus 150. In round one straight up, it's minus 300. So, Yakiev in round one by knockout is just plus 110. Inside the distance is minus 1,200 for Yakiev. Dear Lord.
Oh, God. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
What's by decision? Plus 800. Look, you got a guy that's favored to win by this much, but by decision is plus 800, just assuming he's just going to keep finishing people over and over. Plus 800 for a decision is worth a flyer there, I think. Otherwise, I would go Yakiev by knockout minus 150. I think that's a better value than obviously round one minus 300, but I think it's a better value than Yakiev in round one by knockout plus 110. You're not getting a whole lot of reward there. You can go Yakiev by submission, plus 240. That's a little bit better. But straight up by knockout minus 150, not bad. That's not bad, favorable money for a guy at minus 1,400 where every prop is saying that he's going to tear a hole through Brinson Ribeiro. All right, well, if he does it by knockout minus 150, I can certainly live with that margin of profit. So, all those possibilities, yeah, give me that for Yakiev by knockout, and fight under 1.5 is minus 450. But keep an eye on by decision plus 800. That's for a fighter that is minus 1,400. That is quite bold to suggest that it is that impossible that he doesn't finish Brinson Ribeiro. So that, what was the other decision loss? An M1 challenge. One of his last three losses is by decision to Gaziazilov. I don't know. Keep an eye on that, but by knockout for Yakiev minus 150 is probably the best play. Minus 1,400 favorites. I do not care for that at all. We are now to the co-main event of the evening. And we got Virna Jandiroba against Tabitha Ricci at strawweight. And consulting the UFC rankings real quick. At strawweight, we still got Virna Jandiroba at number 3. Tabitha Ricci ranked at number 7 with Mackenzie Dern as the champion. And Zhang Wei Li going to come back and tear a hole through Mackenzie Dern? most likely. We shall see. Um, we need more people to make their way up here at strawweight. Thanera, that's an option. Fatima Klein, that's an option. We'll see. Anyway, Virna Jandiroba is actually the minus 130 favorite. Ricci, the plus 110 underdog. Let's talk about Ricci, the underdog, first. Winner of 3 of her last 4. She's only lost 3 times in the UFC. One was to Manon Farrow in her UFC debut. That was at flyweight. She got finished in the second round. Then she won 4 in a row over Maria Oliveira, Poliana Viana, Jessica Panay, and Jillian Robertson. Lost to Lupi Godinez by split decision. Beat Tisha Pennington by split decision. Then beat Angela Hill by unanimous decision. And you get a lot of statistical variance with Tabitha Ricci. That's what I like. You've seen her get takedowns. You've at least seen her get a couple of finishes, but she can win really close decisions. Her only loss since November of 2023 is to Yan Xiaonan. She lost by unanimous decision, outstruck 78-15. She got one takedown that resulted in 16 seconds of control time, 30-27 win for Yan Xiaonan there. Now she's coming off a second round victory by knockout over Amanda Ribas. Now, Amanda Ribas has lost 4 of her last 5 fights, and this was the most recent fight for Amanda Ribas. So, with every fight on a losing streak like that, it means less. But Amanda Ribas had to fight, she lost to Macy Barber, Rose Namajunas, Mackenzie Dern, and Tabitha Ricci. So, not a bad win at all. Virna Jandiroba, 7 years older. We'll have a 3-inch reach advantage. She's 2 inches taller. Virna looked super poised to become, to win that vacant strawweight title. Even though she had lost to Mackenzie Dern the first time that they fought, it seemed like Virna was a different fighter. They fought again October 2025. She loses by unanimous decision, 49-46, 48-47, 48-47. Ended up having 9 minutes of control time. It was 118-106 in the significant strikes in favor of Mackenzie. But before then, she was on a winning streak of Angela Hill, Marina Rodriguez, Lupi Godinez, Amanda Lemos, and Yan Xiaonan. So here's the thing. I think that Virna will be able to initiate kind of her grappling offense a little bit better against Tabitha Ricci. I don't think she's going to play like God, I might be changing my mind on this one too, honestly. The volume striking of Ricci, and she doesn't get taken down very much at all. Jillian Robertson did, like Tabitha Ricci is the one getting a lot of the takedowns. Do I think Virna Jandiroba can get Tabitha Ricci down, work towards a submission? She's never been submitted in the UFC. The only time she was finished was at flyweight by knockout against Manon Farrow, one of the best female flyweights in the world. And, she can rack up triple digit strikes, win close fights, mix takedowns in. I think that, that's kind of what we saw Mackenzie Dern able to do against Virna Jandiroba. Even though, and Mackenzie was still able to get almost 4 minutes of control time. I actually think I'm going to flip on this one. I think I'm going to say, yeah, give me Tabitha Ricci money line plus 110. I think that, Virna, I think is going to have a bit of a letdown from, all the momentum she had, not winning the vacant belt, losing to Mackenzie Dern for the second time. She was born in 1988. That is the wrong side of the timeline. And Tabitha Ricci, younger, has bounced back with a knockout win over Amanda Ribas. And, the fight math of Tabitha Ricci losing like she did to Yan Xiaonan, I think is something you can kind of put in the rear view. Even, her one loss to Lupi Godinez was by split decision. And Yan Xiaonan, like she lost to Virna because she got taken down 3 times. It controlled for 10 minutes. Which is something we've seen like Yan Xiaonan able to do to a few people. And there was virtually no striking in that fight. So, yeah, I have changed my own mind here. Give me Tabitha Ricci plus 110 on the money line. Hit it. And now we are to, if you can believe it, this is the main event of the evening. And we have a lightweight matchup between Renato Moicano and Chris Duncan. Renato Moicano is the plus 132. I got him at plus 145, but plus 132 underdog. Chris Duncan, the minus 152 favorite. Let's talk about Chris Duncan, the favorite first. Born in 1993. Winner of 4 in a row. He's lost twice in the UFC, counting the Contender Series. He got knocked out by Vyacheslav Borshev back in 2021. He also got submitted by Manuel Torres February of 2024, not that long ago, but he's been an active fighter. He fought 3 times in 2025. He finished Balaji Oki with a guillotine, finished Jordan Vucinic by guillotine, beat Matus Rebecki by unanimous decision in what was a very close fight. Statistically, it was 29-28 on 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards. And then he finishes the T-Rex before the T-Rex can finish him back in December at UFC 323 with an anaconda choke in the first round. Right off the bat, what is my concern is, I think Chris Duncan is a wild card. He's a dog. You can hurt him like Charlie Campbell did. Chris Duncan is never out of a fight until it's completely over. And, he mixes in takedowns. He can strike with volume. He hits with power. He, is good with opportunistic submissions. All good things. But Matus Rebecki and Terrence McKinney, Balaji Oki, these are the best wins that you've gotten in the UFC. Manuel Torres and even Vyacheslav Borshev, that wasn't even that long ago. And it'd be one thing if Chris Duncan was 22 right now and the loss to Slava Claus was when he was a teenager, that would be a lot more forgivable, but that's not the case. We've seen Chris Duncan get rocked on many occasions and get hurt and be in danger. It's only a credit to him, and the heart and the dog in him that he was able to win, a handful of those. Renato Moicano, a little bit bigger, a little bit greater reach. He is about 4 years older, born in 1989. And let's see if I change my mind on this one too. Let's see if I talk my way out of this one. So, Moicano's been around in the UFC since 2014, more or less. He's beaten Calvin Kattar, Jeremy Stevens, Cub Swanson, Jai Herbert, Alexander Hernandez, Brad Rydell. He's fought Rafael Fiziev, Chan Sung Young, Jose Aldo, Brian Ortega, RDA. Now, let's just talk 2024. Beats Drew Dober by unanimous decision. Gets a knockout over Jalen Turner, who had knocked him down earlier in the fight. Then knocks out Benoit Saint Denis. From that, he gets a wild title shot against Islam Makhachev on short notice. Ends up getting submitted in round 1. Wasn't much of a fight. And now he's coming off a unanimous decision loss to Beneil Dariush. June of last year at UFC 317, it was 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Moicano got taken down 5 times, outstruck, but he got a knockdown. So, my biggest issue with getting to Moicano is born in 1989, and he's been really focused on streaming and podcasting. He's an interesting character. And I think him and Duncan are going to be hurt in this fight, probably. Even if this ends in round 1, I think it's very possible that they both were hurt in this fight. This is a leap for Chris Duncan. He's never been in the main event spot. Renato Moicano has. This is the biggest name that Chris Duncan has ever fought. That's not, Renato Moicano has fought 8 people with a bigger name than Chris Duncan over the course of years. And he's not Islam Makhachev. So it's going to be hard to put Renato Moicano away in round one, or in the early rounds. You know, for all those reasons, I don't know. Like, it's just really hard to get to liking Chris Duncan as a favorite over Moicano in a fight night main event spot. Um, if Duncan wins this and if he does it in impressive fashion and the next fight, like his next opponent is anywhere in the ballpark of where Moicano is at competitively, then I'm going to be much more open-minded to it. But we still haven't seen him get over the hump past the, Rebecca's and the Terrence McKinney's. And, Rebecca, that's a whole challenge in its own right. Terrence McKinney is a very specific challenge in his own right. But he still hasn't gotten over that competition quality hump. So, maybe this is the last time you end up seeing a win from Moicano or you end up picking him or that I end up picking him. But I'm just going to go Moicano, plus 132 money line, hit it. Like I said, I got him at plus 145. I don't think you have to go inside the distance. Like you go Moicano by knockout is plus 700. Moicano by decision is plus 750. You get method of victory double chance Moicano by knockout or by decision and probably get a pretty good number out of it. Um, yeah, weird main event. Maybe the weirdest main event for a fight night this year in quite some time that Chris Duncan made his way up to this point and that like the big step up is up to Renato Moicano. So unusual, but we play with the cards we are dealt. That is all 13 fights of UFC Vegas 115. Oh, and I don't write the MMA DFS values picks article anymore. Now that I am completely independent from Roto Baller, maybe looking for some other writing opportunities on the side in the world of combat sports, alternative pro football, whether it be arena and indoor or outdoor, other minor leagues, whatever it is. I'm always looking for something to pick up. Use my fingers for what I do best with them.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
All right. What did I bet that? Won some bet. I won an IFL parlay for the first time ever last week. So that's sweet. All right. Let's share this screen here. Okay. I will do two lineups, one each for Duncan and Moicano. I'll do the Moicano lineup first. 7,400. Tabitha Ricci, 8,300. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go Kakamaka at 8,700. Yakayev, 134, 9,900. Let's see if I can pick a couple more underdogs. Let's go Richala, 7,000. Let's go Pat at 8,200. I will go Yakayev at 9,900. Oh, that's horrible. All right, not Yakayev. Let's go Tommy McMillan, 9,800. And then I'll go Alessandro Costa, 9,300. $0 left over. Enter. And now let's do a Chris Duncan lineup. God, I got to change so many bets that I already made. That's why I shouldn't make them before I talk my way through this on this show. New lineup. Starting off with Chris Duncan at 8,800. I already don't love that. That's it's already a lot to spend, it seems. I'll go Richala 7,000. I'll go Darius Flowers 7,300. I'll go Ricci 8,300. Yakayev at 9,900. Let's go Kamaka 8,700. No. Go Ethan Ewing. He only scored 84 against Wellmaker. I would put faith in the former top that guest, Kai Kamaka, 8,700. I think for the reason that Kai Kamaka fights tend to be pretty good action anyway. Um, you know, historically, a Kai Kamaka fight could come down to just one judge, a couple moments. I know he feels like he got robbed multiple times in Bellator and whatnot, with some weird explanations from the Tennessee Commission, if you remember that video. Ewing, I would like as a DFS pick, but I'm afraid that a Stavom could make it too low of an action fight and you end up losing on the scoring that you could get with Kamaka. Let's do Kamaka. $0 remaining. Enter lineups. So I ended up with first lineup, Ruchala, Alessandro Costa, Tabitha Ricci, Guillermo Pat, Renato Moicano, and Tommy McMillan. $0 remaining. Second lineup, Ruchala, Tabitha Ricci, Chris Duncan, Yakayev, Darius Flowers, and Kai Kamaka the third. Those are my DFS lineups. And folks, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. I just put out interlude episodes with Jared Night Train Gooden and Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres. Amazing to be able to talk to those dudes. Alex Caceres, a guy that I've been watching since I was 13 years old. It was surreal having him on here and having a conversation with him. Very interesting personalities. Go check those out. Go check out Fight Club Crate. Use my promo code TAPTHAT15 for a 15% discount on your first purchase. Check out King Arthur Capital Group if you're a fighter looking to make your career work for you like a business, fund your fight camp, and live life a little smarter. Folks, thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the UFL. Check out my UFL picks. Enjoy the Final Four this weekend. There's, baseball season's here. There's also Easter, which is a very, it's the lamest of the major holidays. Let's all be honest. Have yourselves a great week. Enjoy these fights and peace.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.